Hello and welcome back to my channel. Let's talk about the Booker Prize. So it is prize season as far as books are concerned. And in the month of November on my TBR, I have a Booker Prize winner, Oscar and Lucinda, that I plan on reading. And so I felt like what better time to talk about all the Booker Prize winners and shortlisted and longlisted books that I've read than the month of November when all the prizes are being announced, including the Booker Prize winner for 2024. In fact, I think the timing of this video is just going to happen to come out on the day that the 2024 Booker Prize winner is announced. A complete coincidence. I'm not that savvy. Let me go ahead and get into it and share with you what I was thinking about doing today. I am just going to be discussing every Booker Prize winner that I could figure out that I have read based on looking at the past list. I am going to include books that were longlisted, shortlisted, as well as winners that I've read, what I rated them or think I would have rated them if I hadn't been ranking books at the time or rating books at the time, as well as sharing my thoughts on any of the ones that I gave a 5-star to, and also what my plans are and reactions are to this, because I like the idea of following a book prize. I like the idea of having sort of a list put together for me that I can read. And the Booker Prize is definitely one that I feel like should work pretty well for me, but I decided that, you know what, let me sit down and see if that's actually true. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to start with the long listed books that I've read and go all the way up to the winners that I've read. I have read 3 long listed books, and I will put a graphic up here on the screen so that you can see all of the books that I have read, as well as their star rating. There's so few of these that I'm just going to do them all as one graphic just to keep things simple. You can see I had 1 3-star, and that was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I feel like it will kind of surprise some people because a lot of people really do love this book. I didn't actually realize this book was long listed. Maybe I realized it at one point while I was reading the book, but it's definitely not why I picked up the book. I read Piranesi before reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell and really enjoyed that book and wanted more of Susanna Clark. This book, for me, clearly giving it a 3 stars, it was just okay. The other 2 books, though, were both 4 stars. One was The Underground Railroad, and the other one is Do Not Say We Have Nothing. And now that I think about it, I read all 3 of these books, I think this year, or certainly since starting my channel. And The Underground Railroad and Do Not Say We Have Nothing were really good books. They weren't quite 5-star reads for me. I don't know that I would really reread them, and that's what usually makes a book a 5-star read for me, but they were really good books. They're books that I would definitely recommend to people, and they were books that I don't know that I would have normally picked up. I'm pretty sure both of these books are books that I picked up, one, because they both got a lot of talk, but I think they were talked up a lot because they were longlisted for the Booker Prize, and I'm surprised that they didn't make a shortlist because I thought they were both really good books. In fact, when I looked back at my story graph and realized that I had given Do Not Say We Have Nothing actually a 3.5, I was rather surprised by that because I still think about this book to this day every now and then. It was one of the better books that I've read in the last year or so, and I've thought about unhauling it a couple of times, especially right before I moved, and I just couldn't do it. So I don't know what that says. I don't plan on rereading it, but I definitely think it deserves at least a 4-star from me. That's all the long listed books that I have read. Let's move on to the shortlisted books that I have read. I have read 12 books that have been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and there is definitely a reason for that. Again, there was a season where I was reading a lot more of the Booker Prize winners or shortlisted books or even long listed books, partially because quite a few booktubers that I was watching at the time actively read or discussed all the shortlisted books. And so that definitely influenced some of the books that I was picking up. I also find that a lot of the shortlisted books tend to be books that I really like the premise of and find very fascinating, want to read, want to hear more about. Because there's 14 of them, I am going to break them down by their star rating, which will help a little bit. I'll start with the one book that I DNF'd, and that was The Overstory by Richard Powers. I had very mixed feelings about this book. I liked the storyline that was kind of going on in the background, I didn't like the writing style of this book. Richard Powers tends to be on the Booker list a lot, as I've discovered. And a lot of these books, the premise of them really fascinates me, but this was my first time trying Richard Powers' books, and I just did not like the way this book was written. I have been told by somebody else who wasn't quite getting into the physical edition of the book that the audiobook really helped them get through the writing style, and I could see that. It is sort of a very loose, almost stream of consciousness storytelling style where like the thoughts just kind of bleed together and around. So I could see how listening to someone telling this story would make more sense of the writing style, at least to my mind, and how I think. I tend to read a lot of classical literature, and the writing style between that and contemporary literary fiction is very different. And so it can be very jarring and very hard to go back and forth between the two. But it was a book whose premise I was interested in. I did start reading it, but I couldn't get a good feel for where it was going. And it was just one that was just not an enjoyable read to me. And so I put it down for the time. I may go back to it at some point. I have two books on the list that I gave 3 stars to. One is Such a Fun Age, and the other one is Burnt Sugar. And these were both books that I feel like got a lot of praise and a lot of hype, especially Such a Fun Age. I feel like that won the Booker Prize, got hyped even more, and just like it just went wild for a while, particularly on BookTube. I actually read Such a Fun Age pretty much right when it first came out because it was a book that I read as part of my family book club. And I just thought it was okay. I thought the premise of the book having to do with a young girl who has sort of a racist incident happen because she's babysitting and watching a young white child was really fascinating. But the book just went places that I really didn't want it to go. And it just kind of handled the topic in a way and told the story in such a way that I just didn't feel like was as powerful as I wanted it to be. So it just ended up being an okay contemporary read for me at the end of the day. Burnt Sugar was a different book that I had heard a lot of, and I think it was just the plot summary I had heard was very different than how the book itself I felt went and turned out. Like the plot summary that I heard seemed like it was focusing that the book was going to be focused on the daughter's relationship with her mother. And if I recall correctly, I do not think that was the sense that I got from reading the book. And so there was such a disparity between the two that I just struggled to get over that. And I just ended up thinking it was an okay book. I gave one book a 3.75. This was back when I was being very particular with my star ratings, i.e., last year. I think if I rated this book today, I would probably just give it a 4. But I can see why I did a 3.75 because it fell just shy of a 4 for me. A Fine Balance is a really good book, but I will say it's just soul crushingly depressing. It's not that a book can't be really sad and get a 4 or a 5 from me. I think it's just for me, if the fact that like nothing turns out well in life and everything kind of sucks, and maybe you find glimmers of hope where you can, to me, that tends to be an experience where you need to either settle that storytelling in more realism or it needs to feel more fictional. And I feel like there's a fine balance that this book just didn't make. I had quite a few 4-star reads, and those books included Clara in the Sun, A Month in the Country, I'm pretty sure Washington Black, Never Let Me Go, and How Much of These Hills Are Gold. I can say the vast majority of the books on this list I read because I knew they were shortlisted for the Booker Prize. Quite a few of them you will see actually came out in the same year. Others of them I feel like are books that people like still talk about, but also got a good boost because of the Booker Prize. And I was pretty pleasantly surprised, especially the ones that were read by me just because they were shortlisted. Like for all of these to be 4 stars, I feel like is pretty good. I think though this also led me to reading the Booker Prize less often because I ended up feeling like the shortlist was producing a lot of good books to me, but not a lot of great books. Let's go through the 5-star reads that I had that were shortlisted. So I have 2 books that were shortlisted for the Booker Prize. One is The Handmaid's Tale, and the other one is The New Wilderness. The New Wilderness is a dystopian novel that I feel like I almost never hear anybody talk about, but I really enjoyed this book. I always feel like it's weird to say I enjoy a dystopian book, but I do enjoy dystopian books. So there you go. And that may be part of the reason that this scored so high for me. I thought it was a really interesting take on a modern dystopian world. It was a world that didn't feel too futuristic, too scientific, and oddly and scarily enough, felt like something that could happen in modern day very quickly and very wrongly. This book, the premise of it is that there's just a group of people who have been taken out of the city during a time where everybody has moved into the city because there's just nothing else job wise, etc., outside the city. But the cities are just a polluted waste. And our protagonist, her daughter, is getting really sick because of all the pollution and grime and whatever. They get an opportunity presented to them by their government to go into what is called the New Wilderness, which is supposed to be a place that is uninhabited by humans. And they're basically supposed to go trekking around it to just sort of scout it out, get a lay of the land, that kind of thing, to see if this is a place that humans could maybe go back to. It's basically just an experiment, or is it? And the book just goes on from there as they try to kind of navigate in the new wilderness as modern day people trying to rediscover how to live off the land, but they're also told that they have to keep moving around, so they're kind of living as nomads. Conditions are really harsh because they have some very basic camping supplies at best. And as the book goes on, you realize there's more to this whole experiment or trial than they realize. And this book is tense, it's dramatic, it's kind of sort of not really climate fiction, and just gets into a lot of different topics. And I really enjoyed every single last minute of it. I cried at the end of the book. It made me feel all sorts of things and sort of leaves you kind of wondering like what really happened and what's really going on. So it is a book that I would definitely recommend to anyone, especially if you like dystopian novels. The other five-star read that I mentioned is The Handmaid's Tale. I'm not going to go into a lot about what this book is about because I feel like it's been around for so long that if you have not read this book and you like dystopian novels, like just pick it up and start reading it. The Handmaid's Tale I read quite a while ago, and I did not realize it had won the Booker Prize, or rather was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, until I started creating this list. And I was shocked that it didn't win the Booker Prize. This is like, for me, another shortlisted book that I feel like, are they feeling like you got it wrong? Because you got it wrong. Like, I don't recall what won the Booker Prize the year this was shortlisted, but I do know it's a book that I don't think I own. And that makes me wonder, like, okay, who's still reading that book? Because people are definitely still reading The Handmaid's Tale. And I mean, that's not, what the Booker Prize is trying to predict, or is it? I don't know. But I feel like if you're going to say, these are some of the best books written, like you should probably be predicting books that have lasting power. And again, I think that's probably my overall issue with the short list and the long list is that to me, it feels somewhat correct that most of them remain shortlisted or longlisted because these aren't books that I feel like have a lot of staying power, with the exception, of course, of The Handmaid's Tale. But even The New Wilderness, as much as I enjoyed it, again, like, I'm not surprised that I don't hear a lot of people talk about it. Like, I don't feel like a lot of people talked about it the year it was shortlisted, and I feel like I still don't hear people talk about the book. And I feel like that's probably going to be the case for most of the long-listed and shortlisted books. I did mention that I have read 12 shortlisted books, and if you were keeping count, I only talked about 11 of them so far. That's because the 12th book is James by Percival Everett, and that is shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize, and hopefully the winner. Again, I am predicting that. I think James is going to win, and I really hope James is going to win because otherwise, this would be another five-star book for me that I have read that has remained on the Booker Prize shortlist. And if that's the case, again, it's really going to make me question whether or not I want to keep reading Booker Prize shortlisted books. Or maybe it's a reason that I should keep reading Booker Prize shortlisted books. But let's not get into our final thoughts about this until we talk about the winners that I've read. So I have read 7 Booker Prize winners, and to varying effect and pleasure. So I'm going to start with the one that I have DNF'd, and that is The White Tiger. And I just started reading this a month or two ago, and I just DNF'd it pretty quickly. I was listening to the audiobooks. Sometimes I do think audiobooks lead me to DNFing books sooner than I would if I was reading them, but I didn't like the narrator of the audiobook. I didn't like where the book was going or the premise of it. It's a book that's actually come on and off my TBR numerous times, and after attempting it with an audiobook, I just decided, you know what? No, I just don't want to spend my time on that. I have read two Booker Prize winners that got somewhere in the 3 stars for me. The lowest rated one was The God of Small Things. This was a book that I read back in college, and my memory of it was that it was good, but that most of it was just okay. I feel like I would probably need to reread it to truly say how I feel about it now. The other book is The Testaments, another Margaret Atwood. I gave that a 3.75, so it was still in the area of a 3. I thought it was really good. It stopped just short of a 4 for me. I don't exactly recall why, but I'm pretty sure I have a video where I talk about this book in part of my weekly reading wrap up, because I did read it last year as part of a book club with friends, and we all thought it was good, but again, we all felt like it fell just a bit short, even though there were some really great topics that were brought up in this book. It's one that I could have passed on. 3 of the Booker Prize winners that I've read received a 4 star. Those books are Shuggie Bain, Life of Pi, and The Remains of the Day. Life of Pi, I actually read back when it first came out, and nobody was talking about the book. Nobody even knew what I was talking about when I mentioned it. And I feel like that was true for a very long time. I was actually surprised when I found out a year or two ago that Life of Pi had won the Booker Prize, because I never remember hearing about that. And I loved this book. And I remember talking about it constantly to people and telling people how what an interesting premise it was, and how surprising the things that happened in it, and how there were just such great lessons and this and that. No one ever knew what book I was talking about. The other 2 books, Shuggie Bain and The Remains of the Day, I both read very recently. I have not read The Remains of the Day before, I don't think. I don't think it was a reread when I read it, but I have seen the movie and I did rewatch the movie, and I really enjoyed this book. I enjoy a lot of Kazuo Ishigiro's books, but I do find that they're somewhat repetitive in how they work, and so I do not recommend reading them back to back to back, because you will feel like, okay, I get what you're probably going to do. But The Remains of the Day was really good, very interesting, fascinating look at the servants during sort of the height and then decline, if you will, of the British aristocracy. I feel like it's a view that is rarely looked at and taken on, especially in more contemporary fiction, and I think it was handled very well in this book. I also read Shuggie Bain. I'm kind of questioning at this point the fact that I gave it 4 stars. This is a really sad, heartbreaking, not much really works out, super depressing book, kind of like I was saying about A Fine Balance. However, I do think Shuggie Bain hit the balance correctly. This was a book that definitely felt like I was saying more on the realism side of writing. And, it didn't have a ton of like random coincidences and things like that, and it worked that it was super depressing. However, I think it might be that this book was just so hyped that by the time I read it, I'm pretty sure it had already won the Booker Prize. And I just didn't think it was that good. I thought it was good. I enjoyed it. You can enjoy a super depressing book, but I didn't think it was like a book that, like, yes, this is a 5 star. I'm going to read over and over again. Everybody has to read this. Da, da, da. In fact, when I think of books to recommend, this is not one that ever comes up to my mind. And finally, I have one 5 star read, and that would be The English Patient. I read this back probably in high school. It was recommended to me by my best friend's mother, who has very good taste in literature. And I read the book, and then we watched the movie, and I really enjoyed it. I thought this novel was very complex. I loved that it wasn't necessarily a linear storyline, that you didn't really know what the truth was, where things were going, and it lines up really well with the movie as well. It was just a great book from beginning to end from what I remember of my experience of reading at the time. I don't know that it's a book that I would reread anytime soon, but it's definitely one that I would consider rereading, and I feel like would hold up pretty well to that, despite the number of sort of plot twists or surprises that happen in it. That is all the books I have read. I have read a total of 22 Booker Prize books either books that have been longlisted all the way up through books that have won the Booker Prize. And I have discovered some really fascinating things about my reading experience. Of the books that I read that were longlisted, I, on average, gave a 3.5 stars to them. And to me, that means that the book was somewhere between okay and good. And based on that, I have to be honest, I don't know that I'm going to be in any rush to read the long list for the Booker Prize. To me, that's just low enough that it's telling me that there are going to be some hits and some misses. To me, it means, let the Booker Prize weed some of them out. For the shortlisted books, I had an average rating of 4 stars. And to me, this is really good. This means that I enjoyed the book. I thought it was really good, especially as just like a one-time read. It's something that I would recommend to most people, especially if it's in a genre, that kind of thing that you like, and that, there may even be some 5-star reads mixed in there. Not every single one's going to be a winner, but on average, I'm going to enjoy the shortlisted books. That is what my takeaway is from that. Of the Booker Prize winners, I was surprised to find that on average, I also get a 4 stars for that. So there really wasn't a huge difference. I only had one winner be a 5-star, whereas off the short list, granted, I read more shortlisted books, but I had 3 books that were on the short list, 2 of which never won the prize that I gave 5 stars to. And so my takeaway at the end of the day is that if I put more emphasis on the Booker Prize, it may be to focus on the shortlisted books. I think a lot of people would maybe focus on just the winners of a prize, and I totally get that. But from what I'm seeing based on what I've read, I feel like I can conclude that if I only read the winners of the Booker Prize, I'm going to be missing out on some books that I would have otherwise really enjoyed. At the same time, like I said, I'll probably skip the long list because it's a lot more books, some of which I was never interested in reading and so didn't, some of which I read and just kind of felt like, that was okay. And so I don't think it's worth adding all those books to my TBR, but I'm glad I did this because it is making me realize that I want to pay more attention to the shortlisted books because it seems like 9 times out of 10, they're at least going to be a 4-star read for me. However, given that I tend to only keep 5-star books, I don't think I'm going to buy the shortlisted books. So my plan at this point is to keep an eye on the Booker Prize shortlisted books that come out each year, add those to my TBR, but then mark them as books that I either want to get from my library or by some off chance look for at a little free library, or worst case scenario, buy used. Because to me, getting a 4-star means that 9 times out of 10, I'm eventually going to unhaul that book or give it away to a friend to read. So those are my thoughts on all the books that I have read on the Booker Prize list over the years. I did go back, in case you're wondering, all the way back to when the Booker Prize first started in 1970 something or 60 something, whatever it was, all the way up to the 2024 list. I didn't mention any of the ones on the 2024 list because other than James, I have not read any of the books on the short list. I have added them to my TBR though. I'm really glad I did this little sort of reflection video, if you will, because I feel like it's helped clarify to me my thoughts on the Booker Prize and where it belongs in my TBR list of books I want to collect and read and all those kind of things. I will be sharing a video of all the Booker Prize shortlisted, longlisted winners that I own that I have not read yet. So hopefully that video will come out later this month. Let me know if you have read any of these books, if you watch Prize List, if you, read the Booker Prize shortlist, longlist, winners only, whatever, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.